December, ready for a Hackaday Podcast.
Woo! Okay.
Hello and welcome to the Hackaday Podcast. I'm Elliot Williams.
And I'm Kristina Panos.
This is episode 324, a ribbon microphone from a Gumstick, texture from a virtual log, and a robot arm from PVC. This week in Hackaday News, or at least one of the stories I really like this week, adaptive optics take clearest pictures of the sun yet. This is work coming out of the National Solar Observatory, here in particular the Good Solar Telescope. And this is a terrestrial telescope, but they do a lot of fancy adaptive optics to correct for distortions coming through the Earth's atmosphere, and have gotten some superb photos of the sun's corona, and you really should just go look at them because they're beautiful, but also because it's a crazy, dynamic, fuzzy ball of fusion plasma. The buzzword in the write-up we linked to in the article was Coronal Rain, which I didn't know was a thing, but the plasma is hot and energetic, and it gets thrown out of the sun, and then it cools down, and it condenses a little bit, and it falls back down on the sun. And so I guess it's whatever, I have no idea what elements those are, but plasma of whatever those elements are falling back down to the sun. Coronal rain.
I only want to see you laughing in the coronal rain.
I've been singing that in my head for the past half hour. I will not lie. Anyway, kind of science, totally not a hack, but give it a look because it's A, beautiful, and B, really wild. One of the cool things that came out of this is that some of the spikes are spikier and unexpected. And so there's actually some new physics here that they're going to have to figure out what the heck is going on. So there will actually be science papers coming out of this too. So not just a pretty picture, also some possible science. And back here on Earth, the Hackaday 2025 Pet Hacks contest is coming to a close. Mea culpa, last week I said it was over this Tuesday. It's over next Tuesday. So if you were crying because you didn't get your project in, good news. You've got this weekend to get it in, but it is the 10th it ends. So you've got some time still. Get your Pet Hacks in.
Get them while you can.
As usual, the contest has 3 prizes, each a $150 DigiKey gift certificate. Thanks, DigiKey, for sponsoring.
Yay.
And in, I don't know if it's sad or happy Hackaday news, I'm going on vacation next week, and we're going to take a 1-week break on the podcast. So no podcast next week. I think on average, we probably do 50 podcasts a year. So, you got to give us a couple weeks off per year. But don't fret. I don't know. You can fret if you want. Feel free to fret.
For all the good it'll do you.
We'll be back in 2 weeks.
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
And conveniently, we end up on a What's That Sound reveal week. So won't leave you with a extra week-long cliffhanger. This is the week where Kristina gives it a shot, and then I tell you what it is. And we roll the dice to see who among our correct answerers gets a Hackaday Podcast t-shirt.
I'm ready.
All right, give it a shot.
Okay, here we go.
This was a tough one.
Play it again, Sam.
Go for it.
Man. I feel like I should know, but I don't know what it is.
It's a pretty cool sound.
Yeah.
I was actually surprised by what it is, and that's why I put it in, so don't feel bad. It's a modern active sonar ping.
Oh, okay.
And it's this kind of weird, sweepy, chirpy thing. And I think they're doing... there are a whole bunch of strange, quote, ping frequency sweeps with chirps in them and all sorts of crazy stuff that they use these days. There is a ton of DSP behind this. And it's no longer as simple as it used to be, where you just send out a click and wait for the response. But I think they're figuring out from the phase shifts and stuff how far away things are, but maybe also getting some more information about it.
Well, that's super cool.
Yeah, the problem is this technology is classified,
Oh.
so I can't actually tell you what they're doing. Speculate wildly in the comments. But
Okay.
it's pretty clear that they're putting out chirps to do some kind of correlation thing. That's all I got. Anyway, pretty eerie sound, full of all the... Could you hear the echoes and stuff?
Yeah, I think so.
Anyway, this was a tough one. I'll admit it. 4 people got it right. We had,
Nice.
18 responses, 4 correct. So, PC Mad, Norbert Wiener Dog, Toyo Kogo 12A Turbo, and Control Alt Doodle all got it right. And with 4 people, that means a 4-sided die. So that's fantastic. I finally get to break out the D&D dice.
Nice.
The upside of giving out stumpers. And although this is my least favorite of all the D&D dice. And up comes the number 3. Congratulations to Toyo Kogyo 12A Turbo Submarine Sonar. Absolutely correct.
I'm not going to remember that for the article.
I'll be getting you an email, get your shirt size, and get a t-shirt sent out to you shortly. Congratulations to everyone who got it right. And this is where I'd say stay tuned next week, but we're on vacation. So stay tuned for the week after next. And without further ado, let's start up the hacks. I wanted to start off with Leo Goldstein's project over at Hackaday.io. We wrote it up this time, Simulation and Motion Planning for 6 Degree of Freedom Robotic Arm. Not the world's most inventive title, but that basically covers it. Leo's made this fantastic robot arm learning everything about robotics project. And we've actually covered it before when he was just building the arm. That by itself is absolutely worth a look. It's a I'd say mostly 3D printed. It's actually only 3D printed where it counts design from a company, which probably is a small hacker company called Toolbox Robotics. This is the robotic arm EB310. They're selling the 3D print plans for it for $10. So it's not quite open source, but if you're going to build a big old fancy $400 and something robot arm, the $10 for the design files won't kill you. What's really nice about this one is that it uses beefy servo motors and 3D printed reduction gears, actually PVC pipe tubes to make the arms. So the arms are really strong and light and not 3D printed, but then all of the kind of technical little bits are 3D printed. And I think that's pretty awesome as well. It gets what looks like really smooth motion out of it because it's driven by stepper motors. So Leo built this robot arm, and then the question is, okay, now how do you drive it? And what's really fun about this is the low-level motor driving is done in Clipper, which is normally a 3D printer software. But if you think about it, all it's doing is coordinating a few axes together and saying, do these many steps to make it move here. You're just doing the same thing, just with twice as many motors when it's a robot arm. And Clipper, unlike a lot of other 3D printer controllers, runs on a computer and has some really nice Python interfaces. So it actually makes a perfect extensible platform for general purpose motor driving. And as we left Leo last time, he was just typing in G-code and having this thing move around on his desk. And that's pretty cool. This is where robotics gets hard/interesting/fun. It's all of the higher level, more fancy motion planning. And he lays this out superbly in his Hackaday.io write-up. If you didn't know why you need to learn all those funny rotational matrix things, he does a good job of explaining it. He does start off saying he hates matrix math. And in the end, he says, oh, well, that's what it's all for. Because it makes everything work. Simulators galore. I think that was the cool part of this. For me, I haven't played around with robot arms in 10 years now. And the state of the art in kind of open source simulation and driving software and everything is completely different now. And absolutely love the way Leo stepped through it all and why he used this and why he used that and how this works and how that works. This is a superb guide, but it's also a very hands-on guide. And it's funny because last week we were talking about, building a project is the best way to learn about something because you've learned it or not by whether the project works or not. And this is one of those acid tests here. He has his robot. It used to be named Manipilator because it had a Raspberry Pi in it, but now it's using so much Python software that it's called Manipilator with a Y in it. But he just calls it Manny for short. And so he has Manny drawing a heart, kind of validates that most of his math is actually correct and it matches the simulations and et cetera, et cetera. Of course, it doesn't start that way. It draws a funny shaped heart to begin with, and tweaking ensues. So it's a great write-up because it goes through all these phases and steps you through all the software and ends up with a pretty darn competent robot arm based on an entirely open software stack and 3D printed parts and kind of few $100s worth of electronics. So marvelous performance for how much it cost. If I were to do a robot arm project, I think I would take this one. And then there's the question, what the heck do you do with a robot arm?
Well,
What do you do with a robot arm?
pick stuff up and move it.
Exactly.
Play chess with it.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So far it doesn't have a particular application.
That's okay.
That's fine by me. Exactly. I like robot arms. I don't need one, but I totally need one. And this is a sweet one.
My first hack is 2025 Pet Hacks Contest. Keep the prey at bay with the cat valve. And this comes from R. Kramer. Cosmo is the prettiest but baddest kitty you'll ever see. The problem here is that she's an indoor-outdoor cat and she likes to bring home mice in the middle of the night that are still kicking. But let's back up a bit. So, our Kramer has a cellar instead of a basement. The difference being that a cellar can only be accessed from the exterior of the house and not the interior. And if you visit our Kramer's dedicated site for this project, you'll soon find out that a while back, he built an impressive series of ramps that connect the cellar to a hole in a bookcase up in the living room. Also that Cosmo can get in and out without human intervention. But this, of course, leads us to the current situation. So here's the deal. Once Cosmo leaves the house through the cellar, she can only get back into the cellar part until our Kramer can assess the situation in the morning. An IR sensor connected to a Raspberry Pi 4 detects Cosmo's departure and fires up a motor connected to a lead screw. I've only seen it written, as Marge Simpson said, that closes the flap between the buffer zone and the rest of the house. So pretty cool. And yeah, that ramp system is very cool. That's not to be missed.
So he has to look at the video and see that it doesn't come back. Is that right?
Well, no, the cat is just physically trapped. The cat can't go up the ramp into the bookcase hole until the morning. It seals off the access to the house.
This is actual intelligence rather than artificial intelligence deciding whether the cat has a mouse or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You gotta go down there and check it out for yourself.
Yippee. That's pretty cool.
But at least it's not on your bed,
Oh, yeah.
Running around the house.
Yeah, but it's a sweet sliding door to let the cat in / lock the cat out.
Mm-hmm. You got that right.
That's like a cat airlock.
Yeah.
Well, my next hack is a video from CNC Kitchen about 3D printing exterior perimeters offset from each other, what was called brick layers, because they're staggered half a width from each other. The theory was that by vertically staggering the layers on the outside of a print, every individual layer would adhere to two different neighboring layers next to it instead of just one, hopefully increasing the strength of the print in the Z height. I guess we initially wrote about this because there was some question about whether this was patented or patentable, and there was a whole hubbub on it because it had also kind of appeared independently in the RepRap community. And then there was a newer patent that appears to have arrived after the RepRap community rediscovered this. Antics and armchair lawyering ensued. I think people eventually found a way older Stratasys patent that proposed the same thing. And I think basically everybody just stopped worrying about the legal aspects of it. And it's been put into a couple different slicers. So it's into the nightly builds, for instance, of orcaslicer right now, called staggered perimeters. The question is, does it work? In principle, if you think about a layer that's halfway between two others, you could imagine the one circle being tangent to two circles next to it, right? So you could imagine them holding better that way. when Stefan does the test, he puts it in his pull test tensile strength meter thing and finds out it doesn't really do anything. And the question is why? And the short answer is he offset the layers, but that just means there's actually more space. And to see this, how do you envision the geometry here? If you have two circles that are just tangent to each other and you move one up, then of course there's a gap between the two circles now. And that's what's happening here. So he takes it to the next level, which is to say, what if I offset the perimeters and then increase the infill so that it fills up the extra space in there and gives him the contact between the Z layers that they were aiming for in the first place? And the answer then is that it works fantastically with a little bit of over extrusion, which I would claim is only really over extrusion for beads that are laid down next to each other. Once you start offsetting them, it's actually kind of the right amount of extrusion. But what do I know? He gets a lot more strength. I think he ends up 10% extra plastic. He ends up getting 30% more strength in the Z direction. So that's pretty awesome and looks really promising for this kind of staggered perimeters slicing. But then he goes and he over extrudes just regular old perimeters. So regular old laid down next to each other perimeters. And it turns out that over extruding that also helps a lot. And these are like 20% better. So in the end, bricklayers works. It does what it's supposed to, but only if you increase the extrusion to match. But just cranking up the extrusion and squishing the print more also works to get better Z adhesion. And so that, it's not as good as the staggered layers, but it's actually pretty good just by itself. So if you don't feel like taking the extra effort to download a beta version of the slicer, you can just up your extrusion ratio on the perimeters and you'll get a stronger print. But if you really want to maximize strength to weight, it does look like staggered perimeters / brick layers is the way to go.
For my next hack, I chose something physicals. You can make your own ribbon mic with a gum wrapper. It's true. Well, what kind of microphone do you want to use next time? It depends on what you want your sound to be like. If you want good tone and frequency response, consider a ribbon mic. If you don't, consider a beer can mic like I made several of. But anyway, you don't have to spend big bucks on a ribbon microphone. Just make one out of a gum wrapper. The gum in question here is Airwaves Extreme Gum, but probably any conductive foil gum wrapper will do just fine. But it does take some preparation. First you have to soak it in hot water and then acetone to get the paper backing off. Then you need to corrugate this foil with a tube press, using some baking paper for protection, because it's a delicate operation. You then have to spin up a motor to drive this thing out of plexiglass, copper tape, and a couple of powerful magnets. Then you stretch the foil between the magnets, clamp it in place so it can vibrate in response to sound and be a microphone. Then you just hook it up to a custom transformer, and Bob's your uncle. It will probably work right away, but it'll be noisy. So then you just need to shield the transformer and add an enclosure. And don't forget the ever-important screen so it actually looks like a microphone from the outside.
I was watching the video and the gum wrapper is just there because that's a source of extra thin aluminum foil once you dissolve the paper off of it, which is pretty cool. And I guess that's the gimmick here because it has to vibrate a lot in the airwaves. So it has to have a super low mass. And so as light as you can get that foldy ribbon, the better. But yet it has to be made out of metal. That's pretty clever.
I remember a very long time ago, I was sitting and talking in a restaurant with my sister-in-law who went to college for silversmithing, and she had a foil gum wrapper, and she very carefully separated it and used it to silver leaf something there at the table.
Oh, how cool is that?
Yeah, because you can do that. If you don't want it to tear, use the water and acetone method, I suppose, but you can just separate it with your nails.
Yeah, we've seen a bunch of ribbon mic builds before, strangely enough. I guess making the corrugator isn't that hard anymore now that you can just 3D print it. So that piece is pretty easy. The only trick is getting the ribbon made and flexible enough and light enough and everything else.
Dollar store crappy foil.
Yeah, ironically, the cheaper aluminum foil you could use, probably the better. And while I am looking through Hackaday, I realized we have an article written about an early ribbon microphone and how it was the sound of 1930s and 1940s early radio. And funnily enough, the art that Joe Kim drew for that as the header image is the one we use for the podcast now.
Whoa.
Yeah. Link that in for you if you want to read more about ribbon microphones. Download the podcast image in full resolution or something. I seem to be on a 3D printer kick this week.
Yeah, me too.
It happens. There's something in the water. My next one, add wood grain texture to 3D prints with a model of a log, is a great piece of work by Panda N Design. And it's actually really simple, and that makes it, to my mind, a kind of widely applicable, interesting technique. Panda N actually made a 3D model of a log, complete with all the growth rings in it, and then imports this into the slicer as a modifier. And modifiers have only really been on the scene for a few years now. The idea is you take the 3D model that you want to print, you intersect it with something else that has, maybe variable density or whatever, and that controls some aspect of the way the slicer does its work. I do a lot of practical prints rather than artsy prints, and I've always thought of modifiers as being something you could use to change the density of the infill on the inside of an object, for instance. And so you could have it with more infill in one part where it needs to be stronger and less infill in another where it needs to be lighter, for instance. And so you kind of make a 3D model of the internal density gradient that you want, and then you superimpose that over the model of the shape, and then it does the work for you. Here, Panda N is using the modifier to adjust the amount of fuzzy skin that's added to the model. And fuzzy skin is something that showed up in the last year or so, where you just have the printer make small random movements on the outside surface, and this makes it have a kind of textured fuzzy skin. It actually feels really neat. If you haven't screwed around with the fuzzy skin, you absolutely should. It changes it from being so kind of plasticky, smoothy feeling to having a little bit more of a grippy texture. Probably super useful for, well, anything grippy. So Panda combines these two techniques and says, okay, here's a modifier that's physically shaped like a log, and if you intersect that with your print and then add fuzzy skin to one ring but not the next ring, it's going to put growth rings into your print just like it was made out of wood. And it's a really cool technique, and it looks absolutely superb. And what's fun about it is the logs, it's a virtual log, but the virtual log is huge. So you can put your print this way or that way. You can align it with the grain. You can make your 3D printed objects look like they're quarter sawn or look like it's sawn, cut out of the center of the wood, or somehow just the intersection of two 3D objects with each other that ends up making this very real world looking object, like you actually cut it out of this imaginary log. Just somehow tickles my fancy. But I think this is something we've seen a lot in the last year or so. Various ways of texturing the surface of 3D prints so they don't have that stupid, it looks like it's 3D printed surface on them. One that's been really popular is to just add surface details to it. So like the fuzzy skin modifier, we covered before 3D Jake's technique of adding texture to 3D prints in Blender. I'll throw that link in the description too. Basically, Blender will distort the surface for you, and then you just go print that. It's really easy. Panda Design's technique works in the slicer, so I guess it's even easier than firing up Blender and modifying your print. And boy, CNC Kitchen again came through with an idea. If you're doing a thin one-wall vase print, you could add a texture to it to strengthen it up, kind of the way, how corrugated steel roofs have those waves in them, because if it was a flat sheet of metal, it would just fall down, right? But the corrugations add strength in that direction. You could do the same thing with your prints. So that's another cool application of this kind of deforming the surface method. I love Panda's log, but it makes me think there's all sorts of other crazy, geometric or who knows what volumes you could use to apply patterns to surfaces of 3D prints and make them look really cool. It looks like we're going to see a bunch of riffing on this idea in the near future, and a bunch of cool projects are going to come out.
All right. Well, you wouldn't download a skateboard, would you?
I would.
I would too, but I'd be afraid to ride it.
I'd probably break it.
Yeah. Well, a little more on that later. This one comes from Megalog_, And I say you should absolutely download a skateboard, although I can't endorse riding it where prohibited or riding it much at all. You gotta do what you want. Skateboards are pretty dang simple, although usually the plastic is limited to the rails. Do people still use those? Is that what those were called?
Yeah.
The rails that you do to slide down rails?
Ooh. I don't know if anyone's used those since the 1990s.
Oh, okay. Well,
The last skateboard I had with rails was a pool deck, if that says anything.
what does that mean?
Nobody under 40 knows what that means either. So
Is that the real big one with the bent tail
yeah, exactly.
from the 80s? Okay.
Front nose, bent tail.
Yeah, okay.
That's the last
Kind
time
of
I
like
had
this
guards
one
on.
looks like, but it's real small. Yeah, it's real small. Look how small
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah, this
It's
is a penny
55
board.
centimeters.
That's sweet though.
But there's no reason not to print the whole board if you can get away with it. And this is actually a 4-piece deck. And like I said, it's 55 centimeters long. It has a cool hex pattern for grip, so you don't need tape. Not that people use tape anymore.
Oh yeah, we do.
Okay.
That's the only thing that keeps you on a skateboard.
Okay. You could bring your own trucks to this party, but printable ones are provided. The pieces of the deck happen to meet where the trucks mount on, so the build is fairly strong, in case you were wondering. But the weakest part is where the tail meets the body, so don't try to do any ollies with this thing. Be sure to check out the in-link, which shows how you can cast your own resin wheels to go with it.
Ooh, cool. And it looks like 3D printed bushings too. It looks like they're made out of TPU or something, or maybe they're molded if he's molding his own wheels. This is completely DIY. Don't tell me he made the bearings. Please don't tell me he made the bearings. Oh my God. And if I read through this project, there are some people who made it. Like, if you're not a 3D printer, you may not know. Normally, when you see 3D printer projects out there, it's like somebody 3D modeled it and has never made it. And they're like, here, try this thing. And of course, when it goes into the real world, it's either completely impossible to print, or none of the parts fit together, or it's totally broken in 1700 ways that happen when you go from the virtual world to the real world. This one has many people who have printed it and said, this is a really good print. It works very well. I love it, and so does my daughter. What? There are a ton of prints of this. So it's no joke, is what I'm saying. Crazy. On to quick hacks. First up for me from OJ Engineering, Ender 3 Pro gets a second job as a stator winder. I guess this is a 3D printer hack, although it's not doing any 3D printing. If you think of a 3D printer as just being a 3-axis robot, you understand what's going on here. He has a tube that feeds wire, and he's rewinding the stator parts of an electric motor with it. Really pretty cool, and a great use of a 3D printer that you're not using to print anymore. From the Open Movement Foundation, open source watch movement really ticks all the boxes. This is really interesting. It seems to be a do-it-yourself watch kit, which only really makes sense if you're aspiring to be a watchmaker. But if you do want to learn how to become a watchmaker, I think this is absolutely fantastic. Anyway, the 3D models are all out there for you, hence Open Movement. So go check it out if you want to see what makes a fancy Swiss watch work. Simon Hutchinson Passive Saturation Box is a cheap way to distort your sound. This is the classic 2 diodes clamping the signal, making it cut off trick. So basically, the signal can't go further than 1 diode drop high or further than 1 diode drop low. You use the fact that diodes don't have a perfectly sharp cutoff, but kind of a nice roll off to make a distortion-y overdrive sound depending on how hard you drive it. This is actually used in a bunch of distortion pedals, and when I went out looking for an example, found the MXR Distortion Plus, which is an absolute classic distortion box. But I ran into a marvelous description of clipping diodes used for audio effects over at Guitar Pedal X. I'll throw that link in for you as well. Most of the time, these are used in a circuit with an op amp, so it's in the feedback loop. The 2 diodes are in the feedback loop of an op amp, and you can soften that up by putting a resistor and capacitor across there as well. That gives you a tone control. This one is just straight up 2 diodes in the signal path. More volume in equals more clipping out. And last up, Richard James Howe. Can we replace a program counter with a linear feedback shift register? Yes, we can. This is a ground-up designed FPGA CPU. Normally, when you step through instructions at the kind of assembly language level, you go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. Here, instead of a program counter, he's using a linear feedback shift register, which kind of makes a pseudo-random but deterministic pattern. And so instead of going from instruction number 1 to 2, it goes from 1 to 137 and then back to 5 and then off to 292. Why would you do this? I have no idea. I think because implementing a LFSR is just as easy as implementing a counter in an FPGA. Who knows? But it's the craziest CPU design I've ever seen. But you'll never know this from the programmer's level. It's all going on underneath the hood.
For my first quick hack, I chose 2025 Pet Hacks Contest. Weigh your dog the easy way. Now, life with a Bernese mountain dog has to be interesting, right? And everything is probably a little bit more difficult, including monitoring its weight. Well, why not feed two birds with one scone and let sleeping dogs lie? What I mean is, why not build the scale into a dog bed? That's exactly the idea behind the dog scale, which comprises a wooden frame with load cells placed above rubber feet. These load cells communicate with an ESP8266, which displays the goods on an LCD. Don't miss the other entry into this contest from Saren, wherein Millie the Bernese mountain dog gets a fetching barrel collar. Next up, 3D printing a modular guitar means it can look like however you want. This comes from the 3D print zone. You wouldn't download a guitar, would you? I definitely would. Probably more than one, which is the idea behind the modular guitar system. You can build anything from a Les Paul to a Flying V, and everything in between. The bodies print in 4 parts so they can fit on most print beds, and since only the modular middle takes the string tension, the body parts only need 20% infill. But if you wanted a heavier axe, you could of course increase the infill. All the parts go together with huge dowels and super glue, which the 3D print zone recommends curing for the full 24 hours before you start shredding. That magical modular middle contains all the goodies that make it an electric guitar, so the sky really is the limit on this one. And finally, a CRT display for retro weather forecasting. This one comes from Conrad Farnsworth. I'm wondering if there's any relation to Philo T. Farnsworth. Is there anything more comforting than the glow of a CRT? Maybe the static that builds up? But what can you do with one nowadays? Well, for one thing, you can pretend it's still the 90s and make a small retro Weather Channel display that uses the very cool WeatherStar 4000 Plus and a 4-inch CRT from AliExpress. This thing runs on a Raspberry Pi Zero W, which of course has a composite video out. Conrad made a custom PCB that supplies a rotary encoder for volume and brightness, a control button, a serial UART interface, and a speaker driver for that all-important easy jazz. Everything is stuffed inside a nicely angled enclosure. Software-wise, a Python program displays a small slideshow, local weather, then regional weather, and then the current radar conditions.
A, I need one of those little CRTs, and B, what is up with people remaking the Weather Channel? We've seen a number of these. And it's just people's nostalgia for the Weather Channel is astounding. All right, that brings us to our can't miss articles. These are long form pieces written by our fantastic Hackaday writing staff. This week, Arya Voronova writes in with the story of the Blackberry keyboard, how an open source ecosystem sprouts. This one's near and dear to my heart because basically a lot of it happened here on Hackaday and on Hackaday I.O. We'll start with today and move back in time. Today there's kind of a community of people who've built various handheld computers around new old stock Blackberry keyboards. And these are nicely curated by Michael on his BBKB community website. The article starts off with that link, where Blackberry keyboard handheld computers is the name of the game. And Michael says, we've got all these various open source little handheld, roughly Blackberry form factor handheld computers. How did this all happen? And so he traces it back. And it all starts with a post in 2015, I guess, from Joe N on EEV blog, where he reverse engineered the Blackberry Q10. And then Woodworker, Woody, on Hackaday.io finished the work for him, basically reverse engineering the backlight and making a nice library to work with it. Posted this up on IO with his demo project. And so Arturo 182 has a small hacker hardware company, sells stuff on Tindy and on Lectrons. And he whipped up a breakout board for this thing so that it was super easy to use with like I2C and stuff. Again, all open source, all up on Hackaday.io, and started making these. And so between the Q10 and later Blackberry Q20, he made a couple different versions of these kind of modular keyboards that were super easy to integrate into your project. He basically provided the PCB, a little bit of decoding, and then you just plug it in and treat it like an I2C device. Lovely. And this is what sparked everybody to make little handheld computers based on it. Just this kind of ease of use and complete control over a really nice little hardware design. And if you've ever used one of these Blackberry keyboards, they have a mouse on them. They have like a trackball mouse, and they're nicely lit. They feel good to use. All of Blackberry company's great industrial design, you can just steal it for your project by using this kind of a thing. So I think what's really cool about this is that this kind of tracks how the original work, reverse engineering it, and then how the first couple prototypes, and then leading into, Arturo's kind of hacker manufacturer version of this came along. And then this is where kind of things flourished, and we saw, the Beepberry and the Beeper, and, basically a million different projects that are close enough to say Blackberry that they don't get sued, except for the Beepberry, which I guess did get sued, and they had to change their name to Beepy. While Arya's story here focuses on how we ended up with a bunch of these different nice handheld devices and how they all have the kind of common roots in this hacking that Joe, Woody, and Arturo did. The reality of the current situation is these have become so popular that the world is running out of new old stock Blackberry keyboards. And what used to be a dirt cheap, $10 hack is now $30 if you're lucky to even get one. And I went looking real quick to see if I could even find a Q10 or Q20 breakout board, and Arturo's all out of stock. I think a few of the larger Chinese open source manufacturers, Seed Studios, must have bought up a huge batch of them and is making products with them. Lily Go makes a little keyboard computer with them and an ESP32. That looks pretty cool. But the sources dried up. You wouldn't think that a few hackers could eventually dry up the entire source of new old stock Blackberry keyboards out there, but it did happen. To fix this situation, actually, Arturo's been working on an equally inexpensive, maybe even cheaper keyboard design of his own, and that is still being kept under wraps, but will be made public fairly soon, and look forward to that. So if you find yourself unable to get a Blackberry keyboard, there will probably be a good alternative solution coming out of Arturo's hacker company Solder Party fairly soon. Totally secret inside ball. We've been working with Arturo, and it is more than likely that next year's Hackaday SuperCon badge will feature one of his keyboards.
Ooh.
You heard it here first. But it's so much nicer to type on a keyboard, even a tiny little Blackberry keyboard, than it is to hunt and peck at something with no or limited tactile feedback. And I don't need to tell you about keyboards.
Can we keep talking about keyboards?
I think we can.
So for my long form, I chose Keeping with Kristina, the one with the HR Geiger keyboard. And in case you were out there wondering, like many of the commenters, the Geiger keyboard in question is the first one, not the book typewriter, which we will get to later. It's the color of it mainly, along with the shape of it and all those holes. Probably the dark background has something to do with it too. Anyway, this bad boy is printed, and yeah, it took a lot of sanding to make it look that good. But the keyboard itself is a Choco-Fi keyboard, and it came about simply because HindDev wasn't satisfied with his previous enclosure. There's a small downside, and that's in the tenting, which is a slow operation. But how often do you adjust the tenting anyway? That's what I thought. Next up is the Serenity from MKBR, which may or may not be their endgame. As they say, time will tell. This here is a special corn layout, and it can have 4 or 5 or 6 columns depending on whether you use the breakaway tabs on the PCBs. It has an integrated RP2040 chip programmed with QMK Vial, and it has hot swappable MX switches. And how about those dual trackballs? The left one is for scrolling, and the right is for regular trackballing about the screen. Be sure to check out the gallery to see the back, because it took an AI around 85 tries to get it right. I think it was worth it though. So, next up is the centerfold, and I just love a smart centerfold. And this Lego tenting setup is among the smartest that I've seen. This is a Softlay RGB chalk, which of course has low-profile kilowatt chalk switches. The halves are locked in place with bricks, and a gap in the base allows the outer edges of the keyboard to rest on the cool desk mat. Next up is the historical clackers, of course. When we think of typewriters, we usually think of single sheets of substrate being fed through and printed upon, but what if you wanted to type into a book or a ledger? You would need something like the Elliot Fisher book typewriter, which did exactly that. Now, on a traditional machine, the paper moves past a fixed point. Here, it's just the opposite. The paper is fixed, and the point of printing moves. Now, how does that work? Well, with 2 sets of rails. The typing mechanism, including the keyboard, moved along one set of rails to be positioned over the paper, so it basically plotted out the type. The type bars are arranged vertically in a type basket under the keyboard, and they rotate downward to strike the ribbon and the paper. In order to do the next line in the book, the machine moved along a second set of rails at right angles to the first set. Now, at the time I wrote this, it was unclear to me whether one fed the book through the machine or simply hefted the machine on top of the book, and I have since found out that it's the latter, and I linked a video showing the machine working up close.
Oh, good, because I was gonna say I absolutely need a video of this thing running. Where's the video?
It's I just highlighted it in the show notes, right?
Everybody head over to the show notes.
Go now. I'll wait.
It rolls over the thing it's typing on.
Yeah.
That's insane.
And it has your name on it.
Oh, it almost does. Well, that brings us to the end of yet another Hackaday podcast. Thanks very much for listening. If you have anything you'd like us to write up, send it to us, tips@hackaday.com. And to follow along any of the links in the show, including that awesome video of the crazy typewriter, head on over to hackaday.com/podcast. Next week is off, so until next week.
Keep on hacking. I don't know why I left those in there. Oh dear.
Ask me how I know.
How do you know? Y'all ready for this?
Hell yeah.
Okay.
Let me look for a link real quick.
Oh, excuse me. Using some baking pepper. Printable ones.
Swiss watch work. Crazy nerds.
Well, first of all, we're weighing up a dog. And since the modular only...
Chimes...
Until a fortnight from now. Happy fortnighting.